Hello and welcome back to the Hannah Frankman podcast. On today's episode, I want to talk about one of the ideas that is most near and dear to my heart, which is the topic of deschooling. If you're new to the alternative education world, you're going to hear a lot of different types of schooling being batted around as terminology for different education approaches. Things like homeschooling, unschooling, microschooling. Deschooling isn't actually an education approach or philosophy. It's a process that your child likely needs to go through after being pulled from a public or conventional school environment before they're ready to embark on a more self-directed education journey. When your child is in public or conventional school, they likely pick up a lot of habits that are baked into the structure of public school and are perhaps necessary for their success in that environment, but that are not actually helpful for their endeavors in a self-directed learning environment or in the real world. And if you are an adult who graduated from public or conventional school, you may also have some of these habits that it would perhaps be beneficial to also at least become aware of, if not unlearn altogether. So I would think of deschooling as the process of unlearning all of those bad habits and almost like a detox period between coming out of a conventional education environment that maybe isn't very tailored to your needs and maybe isn't actually helping you in the long term, and preparing yourself to go into a more student-centric learning environment, which is a lot of what I advocate for here on the show. If you're familiar with the thinker, the school teacher, the writer, John Taylor Gatto, he was one of the first to define what he called the hidden curriculum of compulsory school. The idea that when you go into a school environment, you're not just learning the lessons that it appears you are on the surface, things like grammar, literacy, mathematics, science, history, geography. You're also learning a deeper, almost subliminal set of lessons that are baked into the structure of school itself. Things like deferring to authority, placing your self-esteem on your class position. You're only going to feel as good about yourself as you rank in your class. Things like being intellectually dependent on your betters or the authority figure in the classroom, which is usually the teacher. And in his essay, The 7 Lessons School Teacher, John Taylor Gatto explained some of the most detrimental lessons that he felt like he was teaching the students in his classrooms, which is part of the reason he left his job as a school teacher altogether, because he felt like these lessons were so harmful to the students that he was teaching. There are a number of lessons that I've observed that students tend to pick up inside of the classroom that tend to not be helpful in their long-term endeavors in life success. And what I want to do today is unpack some of these lessons that school is teaching us and our kids and talk about both how to become aware of them, but also how to deschool yourself from them to be ready to take a very self-directed educational path without being hampered by some of these assumptions about yourself and how the world works and how school works that you may have picked up inside of a conventional classroom. If you're pulling your kids out of public school, this is the very first thing I would recommend doing, even as you're going through the process of choosing their next educational environment or program, because these lessons are so important for them to start to unwind for their future success. So I'm going to walk through a few of these that I think are most important. I'm going to talk about why they're so problematic. I'm going to talk about how you can start to unlearn some of these things and how you can facilitate a deschooling process for your child. And I'm going to share some examples of people and programs that I think I do a really good job deschooling kids that hopefully you can use as inspiration. So the very first lesson that school teaches children that is detrimental to their long-term success and that most kids don't even realize they're learning is the lesson of waiting for permission. Traditional school forces kids to ask permission to do anything. You have to ask permission to skip ahead in your schoolwork. You have to ask for permission to take extra time to catch up on something that you don't understand. You have to ask for permission to go to the bathroom. Every single thing in a child's life inside of traditional school hinges on the approval and the permission of an authority figure. If you've finished your assignment, you can't just go skip ahead to the classwork for your next class. You have to sit quietly and not be disruptive while you wait for your fellow students to finish. If you're feeling sick, you can't just say, I'm going to be more mentally sharp tomorrow, so I'm going to make the decision to do my homework tomorrow, even though it's due today. If you know that you're better at doing math in the mornings and better at reading in the afternoon, you can't just restructure your classwork or skip ahead in the curriculum to cater to what you know is going to be the best path forward for you, because it would be disruptive to the rest of the class. Even though the teacher is the person who is enforcing a lot of these restrictions, it's not the teacher's fault. It's baked inherently into the structure of the curriculum itself, and it's baked into the incentive structure that your teacher has been given. You can't just skip ahead or be disorderly in class because it impedes your teacher's ability to work inside of the constraints that they've been given. But because everything in the system is enforcing this behavior of waiting for permission to do anything, students never have a chance to develop their own sense of self-efficacy and self-determination in the path forward that they are taking. They go through 13 years of schooling that have taught them that the most effective way to be successful is to wait for permission and do what you're told. And they never have a chance to practice anything else. And many of them graduate from school and go out into the real world thinking that the best way to be successful in the real world is also to wait for permission. And that is an effective track towards something like middle management, but it's not an effective path for a lot of the things that your child may desire deep down to get to experience or get to become. But they've never had a chance to practice anything other than waiting for permission. So they might truly believe deep down inside that any success they will ever achieve requires and necessitates the permission of an authority figure for them to be able to attain it. The real world doesn't reward people who wait for permission most of the time. Like the startup adage, don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness. There's a reason this gets batted around so much on the internet and in Silicon Valley. It's because it's true in many areas of the world. When I first graduated from high school and started working in startups, one of the biggest lessons that was drilled into me by my mentors and the people I was around is the importance of not waiting for permission. My bosses didn't want me to come to them and ask if I could take a look at our marketing materials and see if I had any ideas. They wanted a culture where if I saw something with our marketing that I thought was subpar, I just went and created something that I thought would be better. And then I sent it to them and said, hey, I think this might be beneficial for us to use instead. What do you think? And if they hated it, I could ask for their forgiveness for wasting my time and the time that they were paying me for to work on this thing. But I was doing it from a place of taking the initiative to go create something that I thought was going to be valuable. And much of the world rewards that. It rewards the ability to think about what it is that you're trying to accomplish in the context of a job, the shared goals of you and your employer and the other people on your team, in the context of a schooling environment, the shared goals between you and your teachers of what it is that you're trying to accomplish in your education, what you're trying to learn, what the benchmarks of success are in your own life, maybe just your own goals around what it is that you want to achieve or learn about or become or attain financially or materially. The ability to look at that goal and then be creative in how you work towards that goal. The real world rewards people who are able to look at a goal and say, at the end of this year, I want to be proficient in 6th grade math, and I also want to read 10 of the American classics, and then structure their time in an optimal way to attain that goal in a way that's most efficient and effective to them, which public school never gives kids a chance to even take a stab at, let alone become proficient at. But this is one of the most important differentiators between what you learn in school and what's actually beneficial in the real world, and is one of the most important lessons to give your kids a chance to de-school themselves from. If you're not waiting for permission, if no one is standing in front of the classroom telling you what to do, what do you do with your time? How do you set your own goals? These are really important questions for kids to have a chance to grapple with. And it's a really big paradigm shift between the structure that can lead you to, quote, success inside of a conventional schooling environment and the habits that would lead to your success in a more non-traditional, more student-centric education environment. The second lesson that kids learn in traditional school is being passive. Traditional school feeds you everything you need, one piece at a time. You don't ever have to think about where your next set of instructions is coming from or what you need to do next. You just have to follow the rules. Stand in line. Write this essay by Friday. Make it 5 paragraphs. Raise your hand if you ask a question. Just follow along each instruction step by step, and you'll do well. This is directly at odds, again, with how the real world works. You can move successfully through the entire K-12 education system and arguably through the bulk of higher education by following this process, taking each instruction as it comes and moving through things one at a time. But in the real world, to get what you want, sometimes you have to be really proactive. You have to be able to say, I want to attain that, and I think these are the steps I need to follow in order to attain that goal, and so I'm going to go do it. Kids come out of public school completely cowed out of taking ownership of their own experience because that behavior has never been encouraged. And in many cases, it's been punished. At best, kids have ideas of what they might want to do, but they think they'll get in trouble for trying. At worst, they've been exposed to proactivity so little that they don't even know where to start. For your kid to thrive in a student-centric education approach, an education where they are in the driver's seat of what they're learning, they're choosing what they're interested in, they're choosing what they're spending their time on, they need to learn how to be proactive. And that same thing is absolutely true for many career paths that they might want to take in the real world. And so giving them the space to think about what they want to accomplish and then to set their own goals and choose their own tasks and direct their own progress towards that thing is incredibly meaningful for them. The third lesson that school teaches kids is deferring to authority. School teaches kids that the adult is always right. The adult gives the assignment and the adult gives the right answer. The adult tells children where to focus their time, and the adult tells them how good of a job they have done with that focus. When a student attempts an answer to a question, they look to the adult, the authority figure, for approval. And they formulate their opinions about things based on what adults tell them. This is the entire structure of a lecture format or a teacher in front of the classroom education format, especially for younger kids. The teacher gets in front of the classroom, they have a piece of information that the student doesn't have, they communicate it to the student, and then they tell the student how good of a job they've done internalizing and understanding and repackaging and recommunicating that information back to the teacher again. This is the entire structure of the grading system. The teacher is teaching children something, not always even things that are objectively true, and then grading the students on how good of a job that they've done in internalizing the things that the authority figure has told them. And after 13 plus years inside of educational institutions structured that way, this bleeds over into everything. It bleeds over into a deep trust and deference to authorities, to experts, to institutions. Even though history is riddled with institutions and people being proven wrong again and again, a student can come out of the K-12 education system with their entire mental framework revolving around the experts are right and the authority figures are right, and I am right too if I defer to them and do what they say. The entire structure of school presumes that the adult is right, and so kids never even think to question it or second guess their own ideas in the face of those of an adult, and they get in trouble for any other type of behavior. It's considered being disruptive. This is not a paradigm that serves children well in any life endeavor in which they want to be in the driver's seat of the attainment of their own goals, whether that is their education or whether that is their career path, their pursuit of a dream that they have. Kids need to learn how to trust their own judgment and formulate their own opinions about things. This is how innovation happens. This is how entrepreneurship happens. This is how creativity happens. But kids need space to do those things, and they need to not be punished for those behaviors. So if you have a child who you are pulling out of the conventional K-12 conveyor belt and you're putting them through a deschooling process, part of your job is to not just feed them the right answer and punish them for being wrong. And punishment isn't always a martial thing. It can be emotional. It can be very subtle. It can be a look of disapproval that crosses your face that makes your child feel like they're not good enough because they gave the wrong answer and they need to self-censor because they don't want to feel that sense of shame that comes from someone thinking that they're not good enough. Your child needs space to ask questions, to be encouraged to ask questions, to not just be fed an answer, but to be encouraged to ask why, or to be encouraged to go find an answer when they ask you why. And they need space to discern for themselves the things that they're curious about, and then be given enough space to go pursue those things that they're curious about and see what they can learn in the process without having a question and being told to research it and writing up an answer and bringing it back to an authority figure to have the authority figure give them a gold star or a red mark to indicate whether or not they did a good job. The fourth lesson that school teaches kids is learning to the test. Kids get very, very, very good at this in traditional K-12 education, and most adults are really good at this behavior too. School rewards late night cramming and test it and forget it learning strategies. If you spend the week before a test cramming everything you need to know, you perform well in the test, you get a good grade, and then you forget everything you learned immediately after, that's still considered to be a success. You've learned the materials, you've gotten the A, you can get into Harvard doing that. Kids do it all the time. But that's not actually a helpful knowledge acquisition strategy, and it's not a long-term life success strategy. Because what you're doing is orienting all of your work around someone else's objectives and measuring your own success around whether or not you've impressed someone else without paying any attention to whether or not you are meaningfully retaining and understanding the things that you're learning. In the real world, nobody cares about your test scores. And most kids go through their entire K-12 education believing the opposite. They believe that everybody cares about their test scores, and if they get a C- on a test, it's going to haunt them for the rest of their lives. But nobody cares about how you tested if you can't actually do things in the real world. If you studied finance and scored well on a finance exam, but can't practically do your own taxes or help someone else do their own taxes, what is the benefit of that test score? No one is going to pay you for your services for something that you tested well in but don't actually know how to do. And in the same way, kids are going through school thinking that they're learning meaningful things, but forgetting the bulk of it, not being able to apply it in the real world, and not doing work that's intrinsically beneficial to them and their long-term success besides getting to the next stage on the educational conveyor belt. The real world rewards deep study and retention, and it rewards deep understanding. It rewards things like learning to the task in real world applications, which, as a sidebar, are often far more effective at helping kids retain information than just a very inanimate and boring paper test where they're marking things down on a page that might end up in a trash bin later and has no real meaning and no real value for them to attach to that can help them retain that information for long-term access. Your kid needs to learn how to learn without just learning to the test. They need to learn how to learn for real-world applications, to satiate their own curiosity, to build their knowledge base because they have an application for it that they want to be able to meaningfully pursue or do. And they need to do that in the absence of being handed assignments. And sometimes this takes time. If you pull a kid out of school, they're not necessarily going to immediately say, "Yay, I have so much free time. I'm going to go study Greek tragedy or algebra because I've just always wanted to do that and I've always been distracted by somebody else's requirements of me." They're probably going to spend a while going, "I don't know what to do because no one is telling me what to do." But that space, that discomfort is extremely important because it allows your kids to develop with time their own intrinsic compass towards the acquisition of knowledge. If your kids are bored for a while, they're going to start learning about things of their own volition because they are curious about them. And those endeavors are going to, with time, help them build a habit of learning in a way that's being measured in actually real world meaningful ways. They're going to learn things with their own benchmark of success being something like, how well can I apply this in the real world? How well can I write about this and explain it to somebody else or publish an article about it on the internet? How well can I talk to somebody about this on a podcast episode? How well do I feel like I understand how these disparate pieces of information connect to each other to satisfy my own curiosity? And these are the ways that you actually want your kids to be learning. This is the only kind of learning that isn't actually a waste of time. But your kids need space in order to be able to start to rebuild these habits that are very easy to lose when there's an incentive structure highly encouraging a very different set of behaviors and no space or time to consider anything else. The fifth lesson that school teaches kids is the lesson of doing the bare minimum to get by. This taps into a very deep part of human psychology, which is a survival instinct, which is the tendency to gravitate towards the bare minimum. We do this for a reason. It's beneficial to us from an energy expenditure standpoint. If you're wasting all of your energy working really hard on something that doesn't matter, you're wasting resources that are necessary to keep you alive. And if you've exhausted yourself on something that you could have put less effort in, and then don't have any energy left to outrun the lion or hunt for your next meal, that's not a good survival strategy. That could lead to your death. And so we have it hardwired in us to look for ways of being efficient and conserving energy. But school also incentivizes these types of behaviors because it gives kids a very specific rubric for success and for the measurement of their efforts that isn't necessarily mapping onto anything that's actually meaningful for kids. And they know that deep down. They know that the work they're doing isn't terribly useful. They can feel it. They know that their 5-paragraph essay on Romeo and Juliet is going to end up in their teacher's drawer and never be read by another human ever again. And so they balk at wasting precious energy on this project. And so they do exactly what they need to do to get the measurements that they need, the score that they need, the grade they need, and nothing more than that, because there is no utility to doing more than that. And they're not wrong about this. But because of the incentive structure, it's very easy to get by in school by doing just good enough, to figure out what the bare minimum inputs are that you need to hit, hitting those, closing your books for the day, going and doing something else. But doing the bare minimum in the context of school just helps you move towards someone else's goals for you, not your own. You're appeasing a teacher, you're appeasing a grading system, but you're not doing anything for yourself for your own goals. And kids also feel that deep down inside too. They know they're doing the bare minimum and it's an effective strategy to get good grades and to keep progressing along the conveyor belt that all the adults in their life tell them they need to do a good job moving through in order to be successful as an adult. But they're not actually doing anything that is meaningful to them, and they're not developing a muscle towards excellence in any way, shape, or form. Kids need to learn how to own their work intrinsically, how to take pride in it, how to find joy in it, how to go above and beyond because they actually care about the outcome, and how to go above and beyond moving towards something that matters to them, which probably isn't writing a 5-paragraph essay about Romeo and Juliet, because nobody aspires to be good at writing 5-paragraph essays because in the real world, they're entirely pointless. It's something else that means something to them. That's what's going to motivate them. But kids need to learn how to do this type of work. And they need to learn it in the context of something that matters to them, which school does a terrible job of encouraging and incentivizing. Your kids need space to set their eye on a target, to choose a project that they deeply and intrinsically care about for their own reasons, not just because it's going to impress someone else. And then to feel what it feels like to want to do more than just the bare minimum, because there actually is a reward for doing that, which they can go through 12 years of school without ever experiencing. But again, this requires space. All of these things require space. Unlearning these habits is a process. These 5 things that I've shared are not in any way, shape, or form an exhaustive list. There's a lot more to the subliminal, subconscious teachings of school that haven't been covered here. But these are some of the biggest ones. They're some of the most important. And each one of these things requires space and time to begin to unwind. When you pull your child out of a conventional school and you're looking to move them into a different program, you've maybe found a school that you're excited about that you want to enroll them in, or you're ready to start a homeschooling program with them, sometimes a bit of a gap between these two things can be beneficial, because kids can't come out of going 100 miles per hour towards one set of goals and immediately pivot towards something else and internalize the difference not only in the stated goals, but the way those goals are being approached. They can come out of public K-12 education understanding that they're not working towards just getting straight A's and, moving into the qualifying for all the AP classes that they want and getting fives on those exams. Like, that's not the incentive structure anymore. They can get that. The incentive structure is something else in a different program. But they won't necessarily know how to internalize the different psychology that is required for being successful in a different approach without a little bit of space and time to just detox some of these bad habits out of their system. And some of these bad habits start to unwind themselves when you just have some space in the absence of more and more inputs being stacked one on top of the other. If there isn't constantly an authority figure telling your child what to do, your child's going to have to start to get creative about how they spend their time because they're going to be bored. And boredom is an incredible tool for all of us, but especially for kids, because it's a very painful experience and it forces creativity because you want to figure out a way to stop being bored and get out of this uncomfortable experience. And so you start working on coming up with something to do with yourself that will be less painful than being bored. And you start to get creative about the ways in which you're spending your time. And you start to think creatively about what you could be doing without just waiting for an authority figure to tell you what to do. And over time, that starts to unwind the habit of just constantly looking for an authority figure and waiting for permission. If you don't have the incentive structure of a traditional classroom, there is no game in which you can be playing this do the bare minimum thing. You can start to think for yourself about how you want to be spending your time. And when you're setting goals for yourself, the bare minimum doesn't really apply. And so again, you start to unwind some of these deeply entrenched habits that honestly, most kids are just going through the motion, embodying because they don't even have time to think about it. The goal is to give your kids some space. The goal is to let them go through this detox period to get some of these bad habits out of their system. And there are some programs that have this baked directly into their curriculum. For example, Alpha School, which is based here in Austin, Texas, they have a number of campuses, but their flagship is based here. It's right down the street from me. Students who enter Alpha from the public school system aren't forced to just start working inside the Alpha curriculum right away. They're allowed a detox period. They're allowed to get over the burnout that they're probably experiencing from being inside of a traditional classroom. They get to come to school, but they're not forced to go headlong into assignments right away. They're just given space. And the biggest motivator that they are receiving to start working is just peer pressure. They go into school. The Alpha campus is set up almost like a WeWork for kids. So there's tables, chairs, co-working spaces, call booths where kids can go in to watch videos or do Zoom calls with tutors or mentors or friends. And they go into the space and they're allowed to do whatever they want. If they just want to, play a game, they can. But they're watching all of their friends in this space working towards their both academic and project goals. They're feeling the energy of the environment, and they start to get a little itchy about doing something meaningful too. But sometimes it takes a while. Sometimes they have to take a month or two of doing nothing before they start to feel intrinsically motivated to set a goal of their own and then stretch their own muscles of figuring out how to move towards it. And I think this is brilliant because you can't force a child to pivot from one thing to another and imagine them to be and expect them to be good at that second thing right away. They need the space to find their intrinsic motivation, which is the root of a lot of this. Intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation. Traditional school is deeply extrinsically motivated. Everything you do is because of coercion and pressures and some external incentive system. A lot of self-directed and student-led education is very intrinsically motivated. You're finding something that you want to accomplish, and then you're setting your own goals and you're setting your own path. For kids to make that pivot from extrinsic to intrinsic, it just takes time. And so my top piece of advice when parents are coming to me and saying, my child's struggling in traditional school, conventional school, I'm thinking about pulling them out, I'm looking for something else. We can talk all day about how to choose a school and how to think about which one's the right fit for your kid and when's the right time to make the pivot. But the most important thing is that the kids have some space along the way to detox some of this stuff that they've picked up so that they can move into the next program coming in with a blank slate, the ability to pick up fresh habits, not applying things that already weren't working in the previous system to a system where they're going to work even less. The gap time really isn't important. I know it's so easy to feel so much pressure around making sure that your kids are learning as quickly as possible and meeting all these benchmarks and are, whenever possible ahead of schedule. In the long run, taking some downtime to detox before moving on to the next program is going to serve you so much better, because in the long run, your kid is going to move so much faster, be so much more focused, be so much more intentional and deliberate, because they've had the space to find their own footing in their own self-trust and self-efficacy and self-motivation and self-direction again. And that's worth as much time as your child needs to take. If your kid needs to take an entire gap year before jumping into homeschooling, maybe that's okay. Maybe that's necessary. I think it's at least a possibility that's worth considering. Hopefully you have found this helpful. Hopefully this has given you a jumping off point to start thinking about some of the more subconscious lessons that your kid's learning from school, and to think about how to help them unwind some of these things. First, become conscious of them, then start unpacking them and getting them out of their system so they can build more beneficial habits in the long run. If you found this episode helpful, please let me know. I would love to know what you think. And thank you so much for being here and listening. And I will see you next week.